Embark on a journey through the pages of history to uncover the mysteries and destinies of caravans that traverse the vast expanse of the Silk Road. Settle in comfortably and allow yourself a moment to escape the everyday hustle and bustle, immersing yourself in a world where this legendary path stretched across boundless steppes and silent sands under the starry skies of Asia. What exactly was the Silk Road? It was not merely a road marked on a map, but rather a living organism, like a river changing its course. It branched into thousands of rivulets, only to converge again into a single stream, connecting east and west. For centuries, people, camels, horses, caravans, merchants, pilgrims, warriors, and dreamers traveled along this route. They carried not only goods and riches, but also stories, dreams, fears, love, and hope. Today, the traces of this path are hidden beneath the sands, stones, and asphalt of modern roads. Trading cities have transformed into archaeological sites, reminders of past grandeur. But if you listen closely and tune out the noise, you can hear the rustling of footsteps on the sand, the crackling of a campfire at night, and the distant tinkling of bells on a camel's neck, as if carried from the depths of centuries. This narrative is not just a chronicle of goods and material possessions. It is an epic of humanity's insatiable thirst for the unification of diverse civilizations, for overcoming boundless deserts and impassable mountain ranges. It is a saga of the transmission across the ages of whispered innovative ideas, the stirring fragrance of exotic lands, and the premonition that somewhere beyond the horizon, there is always someone eagerly awaiting an encounter. In the distant era of flourishing empires, East and West represented two completely different worlds, separated by vast deserts, towering mountains, rushing rivers, and endless steppes. The path between them was fraught with dangers and mysteries. And yet, despite all obstacles, people managed to forge through this immense space a unique thread, woven from indomitable will, unquenchable curiosity, a desire for enrichment, and a passionate attraction to all things new. This thread originates in China, in the thriving cities of the ancient Han Empire, where the finest fabric, reminiscent of the smoothness of water, was created from silkworm cocoons. Silk, light and durable, like a dream itself, has always been valued at its weight in gold. From beneath the heavens, caravans set out westward, forging their way through the majestic Tian Shan Mountains, the ominous Taklamakan Desert, and the desolate plateaus. This path was not direct. It resembled a complex network encompassing much of the known world. Merchants from Sogdiana and Bactria, Persian traders and Arab intermediaries, Byzantine diplomats and Mongol Khans, all were links in this vast network. Their paths intersected and diverged in picturesque oasis cities, in the bustling markets of Samarkand and Kashgar, in the spacious caravanserais of Persia and Syria. In its heyday, the Silk Road was not just a trade artery, but also a lively corridor for the exchange of ideas and cultural values. Along its winding paths traveled Buddhist monks spreading their teachings, Christian missionaries bearing the word of God, Muslim scholars sharing their knowledge, and pagan shamans practicing their rituals. Along with valuable goods such as silk and spices, stories and legends, advanced technologies and religious beliefs, secret dreams and primal fears were transmitted along this route. However, we should not idealize this path, portraying it as an easy and safe stroll. Behind every camel step were grueling hours on the road, spent under the scorching sun during the day and the freezing sky at night. Travelers were plagued by thirst, ambushed by robbers, tormented by diseases, and engulfed by sandstorms. Entire caravans disappeared without a trace in the vast deserts, and their tragic fates dissolved into the sands, like raindrops absorbed by the scorching earth. And yet, despite all the dangers and difficulties, the flow of people and goods did not dry up for millennia. Caravans set out again and again on the long and risky journey. Every step, every merchant, every guard, every grain of sand in the desert, all were part of a great, almost mythical journey that left an indelible mark on the history of humanity. In today's world of digital technologies and instant communication, this path seems like a distant fairy tale, but it is in such tales that the truth about human nature lies, about the insatiable thirst for knowledge, the desire to exchange ideas, and the overcoming of boundaries. I invite you to hear the gentle rustle of expensive fabric, to feel the spicy aromas of Eastern markets, to see the reflection of history in the eyes of people who traveled this path long before us. Let's immerse ourselves in a leisurely narrative. Let the narrator's voice transport you to a world where time flows smoothly, where echoes of past eras are felt everywhere, where the night darkness descends softly, like the finest silk. Indeed, the Great Silk Road is not just a road. It's the pulse of the human soul, eternally striving for knowledge, exploration, and unity. Take a deep breath, and let's begin our journey. Chapter 1. The origins of the road, the first trade arteries. Long before caravans began their journeys across endless sands and mountain passes, these lands already held traces of human footsteps. Hunters and gatherers, nomadic tribes, and farmers roamed here. Their paths were barely visible, leaving only fleeting imprints on the damp earth or a light trail of dust on the grass. But over time, these paths became more distinct because, from ancient times, humans have sought to share their thoughts, treasures, and dreams. Long before the concept of the Great Silk Road itself arose, its origins can be traced. According to researchers, as early as the Bronze Age, approximately 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, paths traversed Central Asia, connecting various tribes and civilizations for whom trade did not have the significance we attribute to it today. In those times, when empires and geographical maps did not yet exist, people exchanged valuables, flint, tools, shell ornaments, rare stones, and bronze items. Across boundless steppes, mountain gorges, and rivers, not only material objects were transmitted, but also knowledge about other tribes, as well as various rumors. These routes, influenced by seasonal changes, nomadic wars, and natural factors, became the first elements of the vast network that, centuries later, would be known as the Silk Road. Significant changes occurred during the flourishing of one of the greatest empires of the ancient East, the Han Dynasty. During this era, China began to expand its view beyond the mountains and borders, and its rulers and merchants first realized the existence of a vast and unexplored world beyond the horizon, full of both opportunities and dangers. In historical chronicles, the 2nd century BC is marked as the moment of the birth of the legendary Great Silk Road. It was at this time that the Han Emperor Wu sent the envoy, diplomat, and scout Zhang Qian to distant lands. His odyssey resembles a heroic saga. Zhang Qian spent many years traveling, endured captivity, wandered through unknown lands, studying the life of tribes and states that were completely unknown in the Celestial Empire. Upon returning to the emperor, he told of peoples living far to the west, possessing swift horses, immense wealth, developed trade, and martial arts. His story served as a catalyst for the Han dynasty, awakening a desire to expand horizons. Thus began an era when the first organized trade expeditions set out from the capital city of Chang'an in a western direction. This path became an artery for the transportation not only of silk, but also of jade, paper, metals, horses, spices, furs, and most importantly, cultural and philosophical ideas. This path was not linear, but rather a complex network of routes. Sandstorms in the Taklamakan Desert, the piercing wind of the Tian Shan, the scorching sun, and waterless expanses. Each journey became a severe test, but also a source of hope, because the successful return of a caravan promised not only material enrichment, but also new perspectives, encounters, and knowledge. Along these ancient trade arteries, caravanserais, impregnable fortresses, and hospitable inns gradually grew up, becoming a real salvation for weary travelers and their pack animals. These oases in the midst of boundless expanses turned into miniature universes, where languages and cultures intersected, where one could learn the latest news about distant countries over a fragrant cup of tea. The Great Silk Road, born from a simple desire to exchange exquisite fabrics for exotic spices and swift horses for precious jade, eventually turned into something much more, a living road through which knowledge, ideas, and culture itself were transmitted. These historical routes connected magnificent civilizations, each of which made its unique contribution to the development of humanity. China, famous for its silk and porcelain; Persia, known for its handmade carpets and incense; India, rich in spices and gold; Bactria and Sogdiana, which became lively crossroads of the world, as well as Rome and Byzantium, striving for new markets and trade opportunities. Each of these great civilizations wove its unique thread into the vast canvas of the Silk Road, and each intersection of roads became the beginning of a new chapter in history, a new friendship, and sometimes a new enmity. It all started small, with a desire to exchange goods, with a thirst for knowledge, and with the unquenchable question, and what is there beyond the horizon? In the minds of many people, the Silk Road is associated with huge empires, sparkling gold coins, and endless caravans stretching for many kilometers. However, the initial trading expeditions were quite modest, consisting of small groups of people armed not only with goods, but also with unwavering patience, firm resolve, and the ability to find common ground with different peoples. These brave merchants were well aware that numerous dangers lay in wait on the path to success. Ruthless bandits, fierce sandstorms, debilitating hunger, treacherous diseases, and deceitful conspiracies. But within each such traveling community, there was something invaluable, not subject to buying or selling, an unquenchable thirst for new horizons, an indomitable desire for movement, despite any obstacles. In that era, commerce was not an impersonal concept. Every item of trade had its own unique story. Behind each silk scroll was the skill of the weavers. Behind each amphora filled with oil was the painstaking labor of the farmers. Behind each piece of jade was the artful work of the craftsman. Caravans carried not just material values, they carried the imprints of existence and human destinies. Gradually, over time, with each successfully completed caravan route, this path became more and more well known and branched out. It was not straight, but meandered like a river, changing direction, sometimes drying up, sometimes filling with life again. Merchants adapted to changing circumstances, made agreements with new rulers, created temporary alliances, and lived in conditions of constant unpredictability. Personalities emerged for whom the road became not just a profession, but a way of life. Among them stood out the Sogdians, inhabitants of Central Asia, who were often called the soul of the Silk Road. The Sogdians spoke several languages, knew how to find common ground with anyone, and easily moved between different cultures, as if walking from one room to another. They not only engaged in trade but also spread ideas, musical motifs, and mythological tales. They understood the value of every word, every gesture, every glance, and in their hands, silk was imbued with the aromas of distant lands. At the dawn of its existence, the Great Silk Road was not only an artery of trade, but also a zone of increased danger. Caravans, like mirages, dissolved into the vast sands, and valuable cargo disappeared without a trace. Military conflicts, bandit raids, and natural disasters often made entire sections of the road impassable. And yet, there were daredevils ready, disregarding all risks, to gather caravans again and again, and set off on the long, endless journey. It was in that era, full of uncertainty, that the unique spirit of the Great Silk Road was formed, a road where everything is changeable and unreliable, but at the same time possible, where strangers become friends, and an enemy can unexpectedly come to the rescue. By the campfire in the middle of the desert, a nomad shares ancient tales of the stars with a merchant who would never have heard such stories in ordinary life. It was then, in this time filled with risk and hope, that the Great Silk Road began to write its first, most exciting chapter in human history. This was a chapter in which there was no place for loud battles and royal decrees, but there was the steady, persistent step of people changing the world with their travels. In the next chapter of the narrative, you can learn about how caravans were formed, what goods they carried, and what dangers they were exposed to, and what peoples met at the crossroads of this ancient path. The reader will see how this thin path turned into a road of civilizations connecting east and west. Imagine yourself standing on the edge of a vast desert, where gusts of wind carry the aromas of distant settlements and clouds of dust, and a string of caravans disappears into the horizon, marking only the beginning of a long journey. Chapter 2 is dedicated to the geographical features and routes of the legendary Silk Road. For a moment, close your eyes and imagine a map of the ancient world, but not one that is covered with clear borders and names of states. Let it be a map woven from sensations and landscapes. In the east lie the fertile plains of China, and behind them, mountain ranges whose peaks are forever covered with snow. Further on, there are endless steppes where the wind plays its endless melody, alternating with rocky deserts and picturesque oases. And finally, in the distance, you can see the lands of Persia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. It is this space that is the Great Silk Road, not a straight line, but a living network of roads, paths, and river arteries that connected east and west. These routes underwent changes over time, expanded, disappeared, and reappeared, as if reflecting the variability of history itself. Rarely in historical events can one find unambiguity and straightforwardness. The Great Silk Road fully corresponded to this principle, representing a multitude of intertwined routes where there was no single main highway. Historians, for convenience, divide these paths into three main branches: northern, central, and southern. The northern branch of the legendary Silk Road meandered through the vast steppes and picturesque foothills of Central Asia, forming a link between China and the territories of modern-day Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and then extending towards the shores of the Black Sea. This route, shorter in length, was fraught with greater risks. Its expanses were traversed by nomadic tribes, pastoral peoples, and warlike detachments, whose sudden raids could instantly shatter the hopes of merchants, turning their caravans to dust. The central route, which eventually gained the most prominence, ran through the ominous Taklamakan Desert, the picturesque oases of Khotan and Kashgar, crossed the rugged Pamir Mountains, ancient Bactria, and then headed towards Persia and the Middle East. This route, the longest and most eventful, became the arena for the flourishing of oasis cities, true crossroads of civilizations, where merchants from distant lands experienced diplomats, religious missionaries, fearless warriors, and intrepid adventurers met. The southern route, avoiding dangerous mountain passes and lifeless deserts, ran through India. It was slower and longer, but allowed travelers to avoid the harsh conditions characteristic of the Central Asian region. Over time, these land routes became increasingly intertwined with sea routes through the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea. Thus arose the phenomenon that historians later dubbed the Maritime Silk Road, a route intended for ships laden with silk, exotic spices, exquisite jade, and fine ceramics. However, geographical features were only one of the challenges on this long journey. The harsh environmental conditions did not allow for even the slightest misstep. Merchants and travelers crossed the Taklamakan Desert, known for its merciless nature. The majestic sand dunes, reaching heights of up to 100 meters, created additional difficulties, and fierce winds could instantly obscure all traces and landmarks. It is no coincidence that this place still bears a sinister name, reflecting its danger. Further on, the route ran through the mountain ranges of the Tian Shan and Pamir, where the rarefied air of the highlands and the piercing night cold became a serious test for travelers. In these snow-capped peaks, many people and animals met their demise. No less dangerous were the vast steppes stretching from the western borders of China to the shores of the Black Sea. In these lands, nomadic tribes roamed, their alliances and feuds changing with kaleidoscopic speed. There were no cities here, only endless expanses where the enemy could attack suddenly, and a caravan could disappear without a trace. However, despite all the difficulties and dangers, despite the fact that the journey could take many months or even years, people continued on their way. They were driven forward not only by a thirst for profit, but also by a desire for the unknown, to meet other cultures and worlds. It was thanks to these ancient routes, thanks to the perseverance and dreams of those who walked them, that East and West ceased to be isolated from each other, becoming parts of a single space where an active exchange of ideas, goods, and cultural values took place. In the following chapters, the reader will meet those who breathed life into the legendary trade route, the organizers of caravans, the builders of caravanserais, and the brave people willing to risk their lives for precious silk and ringing coins. But before continuing this fascinating journey, it is worth taking another deep breath and mentally transporting ourselves to one of these ancient routes. Imagine ourselves on the edge of a boundless desert, where the scorching haze distorts the horizon, or on a high mountain pass, where snow-capped peaks proudly soar upwards. The path calls, and we continue our exploration. If imagination allowed us to soar above the earth and survey the entire Silk Road from a bird's eye view, we would see not a solitary line, but a complex and branched network of roads, like a web stretching between continents. This web was a living organism, constantly changing and evolving over time. Like the breathing of a great and unhurried era, new nodes arose here and old ones disappeared. In certain places, these paths converged, forming prosperous trading cities, which became unique hearts, pumping the lifeblood of trade between the mysterious East and the pragmatic West. One such city was undoubtedly Samarkand, the brilliant pearl of Sogdiana, a famous crossroads of cultures, where goods and traditions from distant China, exotic India, and majestic Byzantium met. Another important node on this map was Kashgar, a picturesque oasis nestled at the foot of the Tian Shan mountain system, a place where caravans separated, heading in different directions. Some went north, others south or west. In Kashgar, there was a mixing of cultures, languages, and customs. The air buzzed with lively conversations in Sogdian and Persian, Chinese and Sanskrit, creating a unique atmosphere in this remarkable place, alongside well-known centers like Samarkand. The historical map of the Silk Road featured lesser-known but equally important cities, such as Khotan, Merv, Bukhara, and Balkh. Like precious stones strung on a thread, they served as oases for weary travelers, providing them with the opportunity to replenish supplies, find shelter, and learn the latest news from around the world. However, it wasn't just cities that shaped the structure of this sprawling network. Along the caravan routes were numerous caravanserais, fortified settlements, and inns where merchants and their pack animals could rest, repair their carts, and quench the thirst of their camels. These caravanserais, like islands of safety in a turbulent sea of dangers, offered much-needed respite. Their walls echoed with the voices of merchants and pilgrims, warriors and spies, sages and poets. The Silk Road was not limited to geographical boundaries. Various tribes and states imposed customs duties, erected fortifications, and sometimes even completely blocked traffic on the roads. At times, this route flourished under the protection of powerful and stable empires, such as the Han Dynasty or the Mongol Empire. However, periods of prosperity were followed by years of decline, caused by wars, raids, and internal strife. Yet despite its vulnerability, the Silk Road continued to be a vital artery, pulsing in unison with the world. When military conflicts flared up in a region, the route underwent changes, adapting to new realities. In the event of epidemics in certain cities, merchants charted bypasses to avoid infection. Over time, the overland Silk Road found its continuation in the seas. Ships laden with precious silk and exotic spices departed from the ports of South China. They navigated the waters of the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean, sailing around the African continent. Thus, the maritime Silk Road emerged, a new chapter in the history of the great route that connected peoples not only by land, but also by sea. These sea routes facilitated the movement of goods, people, and ideas, promoting cultural exchange and economic development. However, as on land, maritime voyages were fraught with considerable risks: fierce storms, pirate attacks, the spread of disease, and armed conflicts lurked at every turn. All of this together formed the phenomenon known as the Silk Road, not just a geographical route on a map, but also a reflection of humanity's deep inner need for unification and exchange. Now that the outlines of this path have been drawn, It is time to turn to the fates of those who paved it, who organized caravans and carried the burden and hopes of this road on their shoulders. In the next chapter, the reader will be able to delve into the lives of people whose fates were inextricably linked to the Silk Road. Caravanners, pilgrims, travelers who traversed its expanses every day. In the meantime, it is worth taking a deep breath, feeling the hot sand under your feet, and listening to the distant sound of camel bells, because the journey continues. Chapter 3 is dedicated to caravans and the people of the road. In the minds of many, the Silk Road is associated with majestic cities and bustling markets, but its true essence was people. Not so much the leaders and merchants whose names are immortalized in historical chronicles, but those who day after day, step by step, moved across the vast expanses through shifting sands, endless steppes, and mountain passes. These were the caravanners, people for whom the road became home. A caravan was more than just a string of camels or carts. It was a complex, living organism with its own laws, rhythm, and character. Its formation required special care and calculation, as any mistake along the way could turn into tragedy. A caravan was born from an idea and intention. Somewhere in a noisy and crowded city, be it Chang'an, Samarkand, or Bukhara, an enterprising merchant made the decision to set off. He hired guards, purchased the necessary goods, and assembled a team. Sometimes huge caravans were formed, numbering dozens of camels, turning into real mobile camps stretching for many kilometers. Strict organization reigned in each caravan, where each participant played an indispensable role. Merchants, like risky investors, invested their capital, hoping for generous profits from distant travels. Caravanbashi, experienced and wise guides, led the caravan through the vast expanses, knowing all the secrets of the roads, the location of water sources, and the dangers lurking. Guards, armed with swords and bows, vigilantly protected the caravan from raids by bandits and wild animals, ready to repel an attack at any moment. The cooks took care of the food, the grooms looked after the animals, the shepherds watched over the livestock, and the hired workers carried out various errands, ensuring the smooth operation of the entire mechanism. And of course, we must not forget the animals, camels, mules, horses, and donkeys, which were indispensable participants in this grandiose undertaking. Without their strength and endurance, the journey would have been unthinkable. Camels, those ships of the desert, were not just a means of transportation, but true companions, an integral part of the caravan's soul. They patiently carried heavy bales of silk, spices, precious stones, and of course people's hopes for a better life on their backs. Assembling a caravan was a long and meticulous process, sometimes taking weeks. It was necessary to carefully calculate supplies of water and provisions, prepare and pack goods, negotiate with local rulers about paying duties and ensuring security in their territories. And most importantly, it was necessary to gather people willing to embark on a dangerous journey, where every day could be their last. When the caravan finally left the city gates, onlookers watched it go. Children waved happily, and elders watched with looks full of anxiety and worry, because every departure of a caravan was fraught with enormous risk. No one could say for sure whether the caravan would return or what trials awaited it. The caravan's journey was a test of strength, where each day brought new challenges. The daily trek was a modest 12 to 25 miles, and sometimes even less when the traveler's strength failed. Spending the night in the desert under the boundless sky by the campfire became a familiar ritual, but sometimes it was possible to find shelter in caravanserais, stone shelters where one could rest under a roof and learn the latest news about other routes. The caravan obeyed the dictates of nature. During the day, it languished under the merciless sun or sought refuge in the cool shade of the mountains, and at night it was accompanied by a majestic starry sky, which seemed like an eternal companion on this endless journey. Dangers lurked at every turn. In the desolate deserts, thirst and exhaustion became deadly enemies. In the mountains, travelers could be overtaken by avalanches and bitter cold. And in the steppes, sudden raids by nomads could occur. Sometimes caravans disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only legends and fragments of memories, and their remains were found only years later, buried under layers of sand, consigned to oblivion. But there were other threats: disease, debilitating fatigue, internal strife. The caravan was a living organism, and if conflicts arose within it, the journey became even riskier. Nevertheless, despite all the hardships and deprivations, the caravans continued their relentless progress. Day turned into day, week into week, month followed month. They were not just carriers of goods, but also served as a link between different worlds, uniting cultures and destinies. In every caravan, there were people driven not only by the thirst for profit. Among them were pilgrims seeking holy places, spies and envoys cleverly disguised as merchants, adventurers seeking a new life on the roads, and those who had no permanent home and considered the road their only refuge. Their destinies were intertwined in the single rhythm of the road. Their faces changed under the influence of time and circumstances. But the path remained unchanged, continuing to lead them forward to new horizons and unexplored lands. Like the flow of time, the caravan moved forward with slowness, steadfastness, and eternity. The Silk Road is widely regarded as a trade artery. However, upon careful examination of the pages of history, it becomes clear that it was a road that determined human destinies. Each caravan was a polyphonic ensemble. It included representatives of various peoples: Chinese, Sogdians, Yuezhi, Persians, Indians, Arabs, and Byzantines. Despite differences in languages and customs, on the road they became part of a single whole, united by the caravan. As evening approached, when the heat subsided and the campfires illuminated faces, the caravan came to life and began to share stories. Some told of distant cities full of gold and magnificent temples. Others recalled their native lands and families left behind. Sometimes long and sad songs were sung, filled with longing and hope, and sometimes only the crackling of the fire and the heavy breathing of camels could be heard. In these nightly conversations, a unique culture of the road was formed, without written laws, but surpassing any library in its humanity. This culture was based on trust and caution, on understanding gestures and looks, on mutual assistance and constant vigilance. The long road, like sandpaper, erased the superficial differences between travelers. At rest stops, they shared shelter and food like brothers. A renowned Persian merchant would unhesitatingly offer a waterskin to a parched Sogdian driver. A Chinese craftsman would freely repair the baggage of an impoverished pilgrim, and a Sogdian caravan leader would wordlessly make room in the column for someone who had exhausted all resources. In these chance havens, beneath the shimmering canopy of stars, an invisible bond was forged, uniting people regardless of origin or faith. Yet despite this shared spirit, the journeys were fraught with considerable risks. Discord often arose within the very heart of the caravan. Accumulated fatigue, mutual irritation, and oppressive fear provoked conflicts that threatened to escalate into open rebellion. Merchants, seeking to protect themselves, often hired armed guards but could not always be certain of their loyalty. Greedy guards could betray their employers at any moment, succumbing to the temptation of easy gain. Nomadic tribes, like shadows, relentlessly tracked the movements of trade caravans, biding their time for a swift raid. Unpredictable sandstorms descended upon the caravans, obliterating landmarks and plunging travelers into chaos. Deadly diseases spread with lightning speed, and in the desolate expanses of the desert, there was nowhere to seek refuge. Despite all the dangers and hardships, people continued their journeys, and caravans formed again and again. Each of these ventures involved more than just trade. It was an irrepressible striving for life, a perpetual movement forward. The road became a home for those who did not seek a quiet harbor, for those who understood that wandering is an endless process of learning and self-improvement. Countless lives, fates, and personal stories lie buried beneath the shifting sands, in the shadowy mountain gorges and the dusty steppes. Their names are not immortalized in historical chronicles, consigned to oblivion. Yet it was their footsteps that paved the way for the formation of the legendary Silk Road. If one closes their eyes and listens in the stillness of the night, they can catch echoes of the past. The measured tread of a caravan, the muffled ringing of bells, and quiet conversations around a blazing campfire. The movement continues, and the next chapter will reveal the purpose of these journeys, the treasures hidden in the bales, and the reasons that compelled people to risk their lives for them. For now, take a deep breath and imagine yourself as a member of a caravan, lost in the vast desert, where the wind plays with the sand dunes, and the night slowly envelops everything around with its soft blanket, heralding new adventures. Chapter 4 is dedicated to the Great Exchange and will tell about the goods transported by caravans, which represented more than just a road. It was a living artery through which not only people, but also wealth, knowledge, culinary preferences, aromas, technological innovations, and cherished dreams moved for centuries. Caravans delivered treasures from east to west and back, transforming the world, often imperceptibly, to the participants in this process. If one had the opportunity to peek into the cargo of one of the caravans moving slowly through the desert, they would see an amazing variety of goods. Of course, silk takes first place, the fabric that gave this path its name. Light, almost weightless material, shimmering in the sun like the surface of water, has been known and highly valued in China since ancient times. A veil of secrecy shrouded the process of creating this material, and the export of silkworm cocoons, or the disclosure of production secrets, was punishable by death. However, despite this, silk steadily penetrated the West. Its threads ran through mountain ranges and boundless deserts, crossed rivers and state borders, falling into the hands of merchants, diplomatic representatives, and monarchs. In the era of the Roman Empire, silk was valued more than gold, and senators sometimes criticized the penchant for frankly transparent Oriental fabrics. But even strict Roman moralists could not stop the spread of fashion, because the desire to feel the silky coolness of the fabric outweighed any laws. Along with silk, caravans transported jade, green, dense, and heavy, like the earth itself. In China, jade was particularly revered as the stone of emperors, personifying virtue and strength. Its radiance inspired artists. No less valuable were spices. Pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, saffron, and cloves filled the caravans with the aromas of distant lands. In Europe, these spices were valued at their weight in gold because they not only gave dishes an exquisite taste, but were also considered medicinal remedies, talismans, and symbols of high status. Spices were not just goods, but messengers from other worlds, aromas of countries that were legendary in Europe. Caravans also transported precious stones, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, turquoise, carnelian, and pearls, which sparkled in the sun, attracting the attention of monarchs and the wealthy. Paper and porcelain came from China, and later, printing technology and compass production. In exchange, across the vast expanses of the East stretched caravans of camels laden with treasures. Precious glass and exquisite silver were brought from distant Persia and mighty Rome. Hand-woven carpets and the finest fabrics from the heart of Central Asia completed this luxurious cargo. Amphorae of wine and vessels of incense seemed to exude the aromas of wealth and luxury. But perhaps the most valuable cargo of these caravans were not the material treasures, but the ideas they carried. Caravans were like mobile libraries, where languages, religious beliefs, ancient legends, and enchanting melodies traveled along with the goods. It was thanks to the Silk Road that the world learned about Buddhism, which, like a seed, was sown by monks and pilgrims on Chinese soil, having come from distant India. Christian missionaries traveled the same roads, bringing their word, and Muslim. Merchants spreading their teachings, advanced technologies, metalworking secrets, effective irrigation methods, and ancient recipes for medicinal potions were passed on through the caravans. It was along the Silk Road that knowledge of gunpowder, the compass, and paper money spread, discoveries that would later change the course of world history. But this path was not only a road for goods and knowledge. It served as a channel for the spread of rumors and fears, hopes, and cherished dreams. Caravans became carriers of amazing stories, embellished with exaggerations and shrouded in myths. At campsites around bonfires, one could hear captivating tales of distant kings and untold riches. People retold legends of monsters inhabiting the desert, of countries ruled by wise women, and of peoples with dog heads. These stories, like fellow travelers, journeyed along with the goods, filling the world with mysteries and fantasies. Each bale of silk, each amphora of wine, each bag of saffron was not just an item of trade. They were particles of a great exchange that changed the destinies of people and entire nations, intertwining cultures and creating new horizons. In the next part of our narrative, we will turn our gaze to how the fates of people and innovative ideas intertwined, traveling along with goods on the Silk Road. After all, often it was what could not be seen or acquired that became the most valuable cargo on this ancient route. At times, it may seem that the Silk Road was just a road strewn with material treasures, exquisite fabrics, precious stones, and fragrant incense. However, if you listen more closely, it becomes obvious that the true exchange took place not in overflowing bags and bales, but in the minds and hearts of those who traveled along this path. Caravans did not just transport goods, they carried new ideas and knowledge, creating an invisible network that connected different worlds. One of the most amazing goods of the Silk Road was writing and language. Sogdian, the language of merchants and intermediaries, spread along the entire route, becoming a kind of lingua franca of Asia. The influence of this culture was so great that it contributed to the development of trade and dialogue between different peoples. Religions also traveled with the caravans. Rumors of a new teaching, Buddhism, reached the East. The first Buddhist monasteries appeared in oasis cities, where travelers could find shelter and hear stories about reincarnation and the path to enlightenment. To the west, stories about Confucius and Lao Tzu spread along the same roads. The first Christian missionaries carried their word to Asia. Islam occupied a special place, spreading with merchants and diplomats in Central Asia, finding its way into the steppes, mountains, and nomadic tribes. Trade and faith went hand in hand, enriching each other. But not only words and ideas moved along the Silk Road. Diseases also traveled with the caravans. Historians note that it was along the trade routes that plague, smallpox, and other epidemics spread. Caravanserais, markets, and crowds of people became the ideal environment for the spread of diseases, which crossed continents as quickly as spices and silk. And yet, despite the dangers, the exchange continued. Journeys continued, for the adventurer always aspired not only to personal gain, but also to understanding new horizons, to a fresh perception of the world. A colourful picture opened up in the bustling bazaars of Samarkand. Goods and people from the most remote corners of the globe were located side by side. Silk and silver, carpets woven by Persian masters, fragrant Indian spices, elegant Syrian glassware, and the finest Chinese porcelain. All this was not just merchandise, but fragments of distant worlds, gathered together to demonstrate the greatness and diversity of the universe. Living creatures occupied a special place in the caravans. Hardy horses and camels, nimble hawks for hunting, and dogs of rare breeds. At times, even exotic animals were transported along the routes. Peacocks, monkeys, exotic cats, which later became adornments of the courtyards of high-ranking rulers. But perhaps the most unusual and saddening cargo was people. Along the dusty roads moved not only merchants and their guards, but also slaves, prisoners, and hostages. Their fates irrevocably dissolved into the endless road, becoming part of the vast mechanism of trade. Yet, amidst this kaleidoscope of objects and destinies, there was something elusive, something that could neither be touched nor bought. Caravans carried with them a sense of interconnectedness in the world. A person standing in a market in Kashgar, holding silk from distant Xinjiang, inhaling the aroma of Persian incense, listening to the conversation of a Sogdian merchant with a Byzantine diplomat, experienced something magical, the realization that the world is not limited by narrow boundaries, that beyond the horizon there is always something new, unexplored, and that everything in this world is interconnected. Caravans traveled through the ages, and each of them carried not only bales and boxes, but also the Great Silk Road, shrouded in myths, appears to us as a road through which the world could see its own reflection. In the following chapters, it will become clear how the mixing of ideas and cultures occurred, what religious and philosophical currents intersected at the crossroads of the universe, and what price people had to pay for it. The reader is invited to take a deep breath to feel like they are in an oriental bazaar, where voices ring out and the rustling of fabrics shimmers. It is worth imagining a caravan going beyond the horizon, full of treasures and dreams. When it comes to the Great Silk Road, images of silk, spices, jade, and porcelain most often come to mind. However, like any road connecting such different worlds, this path held not only what made it into the chronicles. There were hidden cargoes, special goods that were spoken of in whispers around campfires. They did not adorn market stalls and were not included in duty lists, but followed the same roads, accompanying caravans, dissolving in their dust and the silence of the night. In each caravan, among the rolls of silk and amphorae of wine, among the precious stones and ceramics, there were other goods, potions, powders, plant extracts, that in the modern world would be called psychoactive substances. These cargoes were not something forbidden or reprehensible. The trade routes of antiquity carried not only food and luxury goods, but also means to alleviate the anxieties and worries of the society of that time. Merchants, overcoming vast distances, carried opium, a resin extracted from poppies, which for centuries served as an analgesic and hypnotic. In Persia and Central Asia, they knew how to prepare tinctures and ointments based on opium, and it was transported as a valuable medicine and a luxury item for noble persons. In China, the use of opium became part of court culture long before it turned into a serious problem for the empire. Hemp, with its seeds, oil, and dried leaves, was also a frequent cargo in caravans crossing Central Asia and the East. Its properties were well known, and it was used for medical and ritual purposes, added to incense and tinctures. Dubious powders and resins from India, Tibet, and Persia, as well as plants whose leaves or roots were used in rituals and medicines, such as sage, wild mint, and exotic roots, were also in demand. Some of them had a calming effect, others stimulating or hallucinogenic. Psychoactive incenses such as frankincense, nutmeg, damask rose, and saffron were not only fragrances for temples and palaces. Many of these substances, in large doses, caused changes in perception and immersed people in a light trance state. They were used by priests, poets, and rulers in search of inspiration and revelations. Alcohol, represented by wine, mead, and intoxicating drinks, was also an important part of trade exchange. Caravans transported amphorae, rye, and wineskins with wines from the Mediterranean, Persia, and Central Asia. For many peoples, these drinks were an integral part of everyday life and rituals. Finally, magical recipes, herbalists, lists of poisons and potions, which were passed from hand to hand from healers to alchemists and from monasteries to secret societies, also spread along the trade routes. These cargoes, full of secrets and mysticism, also constituted an important part of the trade turnover of the ancient world. In an era of large-scale cultural exchange, in secluded oases where caravan routes intersected, wandering merchants met with local shamans and healers. These keepers of ancient knowledge shared the secrets of preparing special tea drinks, enriched with roots and herbs, capable of causing vivid prophetic dreams. In other corners of this boundless world, travelers could purchase powders and healing ointments created to alleviate physical pain, soothe mental anguish, and suppress the anxious thoughts that tormented them on their journey. These psychoactive substances, like an invisible currency, circulated along the roads, passing from hand to hand, becoming symbols of trust and friendship between travelers. Sometimes they were used for medicinal purposes, alleviating the suffering of the sick, sometimes for entertainment and relaxation, and sometimes in search of answers to the innermost questions that arose in the night silence of the vast desert. However, like everything else on this long journey, these goods were not just items of trade, but an integral part of the great history of humankind, its relentless pursuit to go beyond the ordinary. Historians, engrossed in the chronicles of great names and dates, rarely pay attention to these modest cargoes. They are lost in the dust raised by the feet of countless caravans. But if you listen carefully, If you look beyond the pompous facade of great trade deals and mighty empires, you can hear the whispers of those who carried with them not only silks and spices, but also forgotten recipes, medicinal herbs, and magical potions. After all, the Great Path has always been more than just a road. It was a path permeated with desires and hopes, fears and anxieties. Since ancient times, humanity has striven not only for material wealth, but also for the comprehension of truth. Inquiries drew people to distant lands, full of the unknown. In the following chapters, the reader will continue this fascinating journey to see how fateful events influenced the course of history. What secrets did the caravans hold? What spiritual cargo did they carry besides gold and silks? Imagine a bonfire blazing in the night desert, a bowl of fragrant potion, the whisper of a sage rising to the stars. The journey continues. Chapter 5 is dedicated to the spiritual caravan, the exchange of religions and cultures. When it comes to the Great Silk Road, the imagination conjures up images full of gold and spices. However, the significance of this path was not limited to trade. An even more valuable cargo was the ideas and beliefs that traveled along with the caravans. These invisible but tangible flows penetrated cities and people's hearts, transforming the world. The Silk Road, which connected East and West, became not only a trade route, but also a corridor for cultures, religions, myths, and philosophical teachings. For centuries, it facilitated a great spiritual exchange. Travelers were driven by more than just mercantile interests. Pilgrims, missionaries, sages, philosophers, and simply seekers of truth traveled with the caravans. They did not carry bales of fabric, but they carried words and knowledge that could change the consciousness of entire peoples. One of the first and most significant spiritual currents to spread along the Silk Road was Buddhism. Originating in India in the 6th and 5th centuries BC, it quickly crossed the borders of its homeland and moved north and east into Central Asia and China. This path of enlightenment coincided with caravan routes. Buddhist monks traveled with merchants, using caravans as a means of transportation and protection. They traveled from India through mountain passes and vast deserts. Along ancient trails, where once Bactrian merchants and Chinese caravans had paved their way through mountain passes, carrying not only goods, but also spiritual treasures, unique centers of culture and faith began to emerge. Scrolls with the sayings of the Buddha, statues embodying the ideal of enlightenment, and stories about the path to nirvana. All this traveled with the caravans, finding refuge in oases along the roads. Here, next to bustling caravanserai, Buddhist monasteries grew up, becoming centers not only of spiritual practice, but also of intellectual exchange. Weary travelers found in them not only shelter and food, but also the opportunity to join the wisdom of the monks. It was thanks to these tireless wanderers, carrying the word of the Buddha across continents, that Buddhism spread throughout Asia. In China, these ideas gave rise to a unique direction, Chan Buddhism, which later, moving to Japan, became known as Zen Buddhism. However, Buddhism was not the only spiritual force spreading along the Silk Road. Parallel to the Buddhist missionaries, preachers of Christianity were also moving along the same roads. In the 7th century, when the Christian world was engulfed in schism, Eastern Christian communities moved east, building churches and schools in Persia and Sogdiana, even reaching China, where they left noticeable traces of their culture. Archaeological finds, such as inscriptions and crosses dating back to the 9th century, testify to the presence of these first Christian missionaries, whose voices sounded in the desert alongside the voices of Buddhist monks and Sogdian merchants. And of course, one cannot fail to mention Islam, which became one of the most powerful cultural forces spreading along the Silk Road. After its emergence in the 7th century, Muslim merchants and preachers actively used caravan routes to spread their faith. They moved from Arabia and Persia towards Central Asia and China, laying the foundations for new centers of Islamic culture. For Muslim merchants, trade and religion were inextricably linked, as every transaction was seen not only as a material act, but also as a spiritual one. In every word, there was an invocation of Allah, and every new market became an opportunity to spread the faith. Alongside Muslims, Manichaeans, Zoroastrians, and followers of other ancient cults traveled the trade routes. Some of their teachings disappeared into the sands of time, while others found fertile ground and took root. It was amazing how these cultures intricately intertwined in urban centers. In cities, one could encounter people for whom religious boundaries were quite blurred. A Sogdian merchant might wear an amulet with an image of Buddha, practice Zoroastrianism, and yet observe Islamic trade laws. In cities such as Kashgar and Samarkand, mosques, Buddhist stupas, Christian churches, and pagan shrines coexisted in the same bazaar. People lived side by side, argued, traded, married, and exchanged holidays and traditions. The Great Silk Road became a prototype of a multicultural world where, despite the absence of talk about globalization, it already existed in every city, at every campfire, where a continuous dialogue of civilizations took place. For centuries, like a slow caravan in the night, the SR, presumably the Silk Road, steadily made its way. However, along with the spread of ideas and religions, conflicts also arose, as cultural interaction was not always harmonious. Often, new religious movements would gather their caravans again and rush forward, carrying with them words, faith, and hope. In the next part of this chapter, we will take a closer look at the daily life of these people, the peculiarities of intercultural communication, their disputes and celebrations, and how caravans united people not only through trade, but also through the exchange of meanings. And now, take a deep breath and imagine yourself by a campfire in one of the caravanserais, listening to the discussion of a monk and a merchant, watching the flickering lights of an approaching caravan. If you had the opportunity to travel to a crossroads of caravan routes, say Samarkand or Balkh in the 8th and 9th centuries, you would see not only goods, but also a kaleidoscope of human destinies and worldviews. In this lively place, amidst the noise of markets, the aromas of grilled meat and spices, in the diverse caravanserais after an exhausting day, people of all kinds gathered around the campfires. Buddhist pilgrims, Persian merchants, Arab sages, Sogdian traders. Books, amulets, prayers became gifts. These casual conversations along the way sometimes had a more profound impact on people's worldviews than entire armies and laws. Caravanserais became a kind of university without walls or diplomas, where everyone studied the customs and beliefs of their neighbor, where people learned tolerance not out of idealism, was necessary for survival on the long journey, but sometimes spiritual exchange turned into a mystical intertwining of ideas. An example of this is the spread of Manichaeism, a religion founded in the 3rd century in Persia by the prophet Mani. The Manichaeans believed in the struggle between light and darkness, the eternal choice between good and evil. Their teachings, which combined elements of Christianity and Buddhism, spread throughout the Silk Road from Central Asia to China. Chinese chronicles have preserved mentions of Manichaean books, rewritten from the original found in the sands of Turfan. In the cities of Central Asia, archaeologists find images where Buddha coexists with symbols of Zoroastrian fire or Christian crosses. This reflects real life, where faith was flexible and changeable, like the roads of the Silk Road. This path became a space where the boundaries between us and them blurred. On the road, it was impossible to remain isolated. Any religion and custom were influenced by neighbors, changing everyone. Even the great powers could not resist this exchange. Chinese emperors welcomed foreign missionaries to the court. Persian shahs patronized pilgrims, and Mongol khans, the rulers of the road in the 13th century, allowed caravans and religions to cross their lands unhindered. However, the spiritual caravan of the Silk Road was not always peaceful. There were also religious clashes. Epochs of conflict, when religious beliefs entered into an irreconcilable struggle, were marked by the construction of mosques on top of overthrown shrines and the tragic death of missionaries in the vast steppes, whose sermons turned to ashes along with their sacred books. However, despite the turbulent vicissitudes of history, the fundamental principle of the Great Road remained unchanged: relentless movement and fruitful exchange. In every city, in the bustling bazaars, under the shade of nomadic tents, voices sounded, dissimilar to each other, but united by a desire for dialogue. This process, lasting for centuries and passed down from generation to generation, formed a unique cultural mosaic of Eurasia, which we can observe today. Visiting Samarkand, Bukhara, or Kashgar, one can see in the faces of the locals, in the architectural ensembles, in the melodious songs and ancient legends, echoes of that great invisible caravan that for centuries paved its way through history, carrying faith, music, and languages. The Great Silk Road taught people not only to trade, but also to listen attentively to each other, comprehending the wisdom of other cultures. In the following chapters, we will examine how empires and wars influenced the fate of this route, how its paths changed, how cities flourished and declined, and how the history of trade routes became intertwined with the destinies of the peoples inhabiting these lands. For now, it is worth taking a deep breath and imagining yourself in a bustling bazaar, located in one of the picturesque oases scattered across the vast expanses of Eurasia, where languages, cultures, and traditions have mixed. Over these ancient paths, like celestial luminaries, epochs and rulers succeeded one another. The Great Silk Road was never isolated. Its history was inextricably intertwined with the destinies of great empires, with the ambitious designs of kings and emperors, with devastating raids and bloody wars, with the triumphs and collapses of states. If we liken the road to an artery, then the political map served as its pulse, and each rise or fall of empires echoed with a new rhythm in the heart of the route. At the origin of this path stood the mighty Han Empire, which united China and opened the doors of the world to its merchants and diplomats. It was under Emperor Wu that caravans first moved westward under the protection of Chinese banners. Han troops paved the way through turbulent steppes, erected fortifications, and concluded agreements with local tribes. For Han China, the Great Silk Road was not just a trade artery, but also a strategically important corridor. Thanks to it, the empire received war horses from the Western tribes, which were vital in the fight against nomads. However, as soon as the power of the Han Empire began to wane, the path became unsafe. In the north and west, nomadic peoples rose. The Xiongnu, Wusun Turks, who established control over the steppes and levied tribute from passing caravans. Sometimes they acted as allies, but more often they became ruthless robbers. Following them, Sasanian Persia appeared on the historical stage. These powerful empires, which held the western part of the legendary route under their control, waged incessant wars with the Roman Empire, and then with Byzantium, which periodically led to interruptions in the movement of goods and people. The Great Silk Road, like a living organism, reacted sensitively to these military conflicts. During periods of clashes between armies in Mesopotamia, trade practically ceased, as if holding its breath. However, with the conclusion of peace agreements, caravans once again set out on their way, resuming economic life. In the 6th century, the world entered a new era, marked by fierce rivalry between Byzantium and Sasanian Persia for dominance over eastern trade routes. Byzantine merchants, driven by a thirst for profit, sought to establish direct access to Chinese silk, but Parthian and Persian rulers, unwilling to lose their monopoly, hindered these aspirations in every possible way. There is a beautiful and mysterious story about how the Byzantine Emperor Justinian V in the 6th century managed to seize the secret of Chinese silk production. According to legend, 2 Nestorian monks, having visited distant China, managed to secretly export silkworm cocoons, hiding them in the hollow stems of reeds, and deliver the precious cargo to Constantinople. Thus, Byzantium began its own silk production, which dealt a significant blow to one of the key monopolies on the Great Silk Road. However, while the empires of the East were fighting for markets and spheres of influence, a new formidable force was maturing in the north and east, the Turkic Khaganates. These nomadic empires, which united vast territories of Central Asia under their rule, became the new masters of the boundless steppes. Their attitude to the Great Silk Road was ambiguous and dual. On the one hand, they provided protection to caravans, charging duties for this, and on the other, they could raid and rob merchants, seeking to strengthen their influence and replenish the treasury. After the departure of the era of Turkic rule, the Arab Caliphate triumphantly entered the historical stage. As a result of the rapid spread of Islamic culture in the 7th-8th centuries, the Caliphate established its control over the western sections of the legendary Silk Road, turning them into bustling trade arteries. In the prosperous cities of Khorasan, enterprising merchants occupied key positions in the organization and support of caravans, becoming an integral part of the trading process. At the same time, in distant China, the Tang dynasty, 7th and 9th centuries, was experiencing a period of unprecedented prosperity, known as the Golden Age. The wise Tang emperors wholeheartedly supported trade by building caravanserais for travelers' convenience and forging mutually beneficial agreements with nomadic tribes, ensuring the safety of trade routes. Sogdians, Persians, and Arabs settled in the bustling cities of Chini and Laya, engaging in lively trade and creating a vibrant tapestry of cultural exchange. During this era, the Silk Road reached unprecedented heights in both scale and security, attracting merchants and travelers from all corners of the world. However, this seemingly unshakable world proved surprisingly fragile. In the mid-8th century, The fateful Battle of Talas occurred between the forces of the Arab Caliphate and the Chinese army. The Muslims emerged victorious, leading to a weakening of Chinese influence in Central Asia. From that point onward, control over the trade routes became increasingly fragmented and unstable. Empires rose and fell on the historical stage: Seljuks, Khwarezmians, Mongols, each contributing to the fate of the Silk Road, influencing its development and function. In the next part of this narrative, we will witness the Silk Road experiencing its most unexpected and astonishing era, a period when the entire vast territory of Eurasia came under the dominion of a single, powerful empire. We will recount the Mongol conquest and the time that historians would later call Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, a period of relative stability and prosperity established across the expanses of Genghis Khan's empire. The unobstructed expanse of the Mediterranean beckons with its horizons. Imagine countless armies marching along the same paths as trade caravans. Feel the breath of bygone eras of great battles and mighty empires that left indelible marks on these lands. The Silk Road experienced its ups and downs, but the most ambiguous and astonishing period was the era of the Mongol Empire, when history itself seemed to pause in anticipation. In the 13th century, an unpredictable force emerged on the world stage. The Mongols, nomadic tribes long despised as marginal, suddenly united under the leadership of Genghis Khan. This remarkable conqueror not only subjugated territories, but created an empire stretching from Chinese lands to the Hungarian plains, uniting East and West under a single rule for the first time in history. One might think that the Mongols would destroy the caravans, but the opposite happened. After devastating wars and the conquest of peoples, they unexpectedly became guarantors of the safety of the Great Road. This period is known to historians as Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. In this era of relative calm and order, merchants and ambassadors could travel vast distances without fear of attack or the arbitrariness of local rulers. Caravans once again moved along the ancient roads, caravanserais revived, bazaars filled with goods, old cities were revitalized, and new ones began to grow. The rulers of the Mongol Empire recognized the vital importance of trade for their state. Caravans represented not only a source of immense wealth, but also an effective tool for managing a vast territory. To stimulate trade and ensure safe passage, the Mongols introduced uniform trade regulations that applied throughout the empire. They also created an advanced network of postal stations, known as Yam, where travelers could change horses and quickly transmit messages to any part of the empire. To protect merchants, they introduced safe conduct passes, special documents guaranteeing safe passage and protection from abuse. The Venetian merchant and traveler Marco Polo, in the 13th century, made an unprecedented journey from Europe to China, to the court of the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan. In his travel notes, he described thriving cities, wealthy peoples, and the amazing customs of the peoples of the East, captivating the imagination of Europeans. His stories became one of the first bridges between Western and Eastern civilizations. However, Marco Polo was far from the only one who followed this path. Other merchants, missionaries, and diplomats traveled along the roads of the empire. In the monasteries of Samarkand and Merv, monks from Italy and India met, exchanging knowledge and experience, while in the markets of Kashgar, Sogdians and Armenians engaged in lively debates. Thus, the Mongol Empire became a bustling thoroughfare, along which not only goods but also ideas, beliefs, and stories moved, enriching the culture and worldview of various peoples. Unfortunately, even Mongol power could not withstand the inexorable passage of time. By the 14th century, the great empire began to fragment. The descendants of Genghis Khan engaged in a struggle for power, igniting internecine wars, which led to a loss of security on the roads. Caravans once again became subject to attacks by robbers, and the once thriving oasis cities gradually fell into disrepair, testifying to the decline of a great era. The final chord in the story of the Great Silk Road was the plague pandemic that erupted in the 14th century, known in history as the Black Death. This devastating epidemic, which claimed the lives of millions, spread across the world precisely through trade arteries, along the very caravan routes that had served as a bridge between East and West for centuries. The irony was that the network of roads, designed to enrich and unite, turned into a channel for the spread of death. Following the Black Death came bloody wars, new waves of nomadic and barbaric invasions and political chaos. And in the 15th century, the Great Silk Road faced its final decisive blow, the discovery of sea routes. When daring seafarers from Portugal and Spain charted a sea route to India and China, the overland caravan route lost its former significance. Trade flows shifted to maritime vessels, thriving oasis cities fell into disrepair, and majestic caravanserais turned into ruins. However, despite all the vicissitudes of fate, the spirit of the Great Silk Road did not disappear without a trace. Even today, studying old maps or heeding tales of bygone eras, we realize that the Great Silk Road has not vanished into oblivion, but has merely transformed, taking on new forms and the ideas it once carried. The desire for the exchange of knowledge and experience, an unquenchable thirst for understanding other cultures and peoples, an irrepressible curiosity about distant, unexplored worlds, continue to live in the hearts of people to this day. In the next part of the narrative, we will talk about the decline of the legendary path, about how relentless time and human actions gradually erased caravan routes from the face of the earth, but could not consign the memory of them to oblivion. The reader is invited to imagine themselves as a traveller wandering along the roads in the mid-14th century, around only the night darkness, a crackling fire, a scattering of stars overhead. In the distance, the domes of Samarkand are visible, and ahead, the lights of distant Beijing glimmer. The path is long and thorny, but it should be remembered that all roads eventually come to an end, even those that seem unshakable and eternal. The path that for centuries connected East and West was inexorably fading, like a dying fire in the vast steppe, when weary travelers disperse in different directions, and the night plunges again into impenetrable darkness and ringing emptiness. It is worth noting that this decline was not sudden and fleeting. It came gradually, like a thick morning fog, slowly obscuring familiar outlines. After the brilliant era of the Mongol Empire and a brief period of prosperity in the 14th century, the legendary path began to gradually lose its strength. The first crushing blow was the Black Death, a terrible plague epidemic that originated in the heart of Central Asia and quickly spread throughout the Eurasian continent, reaching the shores of Europe in 1347. According to the generally accepted version, it was along the trade routes, along those very caravan roads, that the deadly disease reached the Mediterranean. For centuries, people sought to find immense wealth and sacred knowledge on this path. But now, the legendary path brought with it only inevitable death. According to the most conservative estimates, the terrible epidemic claimed the lives of half the population of Europe and a significant part of the population of Asia. Cities and settlements were deserted. Caravans became a rare sight. Once enterprising merchants were afraid to leave their homes, and noisy markets and trading squares fell into disrepair. After the end of the epidemic, the world changed forever. The political map of Central Asia once again acquired a patchwork appearance. The mighty Mongol Empire disintegrated into many warring states. Its descendants waged bloody wars against each other, and the newly formed states were unable to ensure the safety of trade caravans. In the vast steppes, robbers and marauders reappeared, attacking lone travelers. Many cities that were once bustling hubs of the legendary Silk Road turned into lifeless ruins. Caravanserais, which served as shelters for merchants and travelers, were deserted and gradually destroyed by time and the elements. Caravans became smaller and smaller, and the routes more and more dangerous. However, epidemics and military conflicts were only isolated manifestations of decline. A new threat was looming from the east. In the 15th century, in China, the Mongol Yuan dynasty gave way to the Ming dynasty. The new rulers were wary of the outside world. They tightened border controls, reduced the number of trade missions, began to build new defensive structures, and introduced restrictions on foreign trade. At the same time, the Ottoman Empire was strengthening on the western borders, capturing Constantinople in 1453. The Ottomans also established control over key sections of trade routes, introducing new customs duties and restrictions. But these events weren't the most devastating blow to the Silk Road's fate. The real end came from the sea. In 1498, Portuguese navigator Vasco da Gama sailed around Africa and reached the shores of India. The sea route, which merchants and monarchs had dreamed of for centuries, became a reality. From that moment on, goods previously transported through steppes and deserts began to be transported by sea. It proved to be simpler, faster, and more economically advantageous. Ships could deliver tons of silk and spices in a matter of months, not years. There was no need to pay duties to numerous princes or risk life in desert regions. Over time, trade shifted to ocean routes. The Great Silk Road began to empty. Cities that had flourished for centuries thanks to caravans declined. Travelers who visited Samarkand or Bukhara in the 16th and 17th centuries found dilapidated walls and deserted markets. Caravanserais stood abandoned, and the dusty roads along which people and goods had moved for centuries became overgrown with grass. However, the disappearance of the ancient artery was not limited to the physical aspect. It marked the decline of an entire era. Gone was the time of unhurried, thoughtful movement, when goods and concepts traveled across the land, passing from hand to hand, from one settlement to another. Trade relations in those days were not just an economic exchange, but also a form of social interaction, a platform for meetings and lively discussions. With the advent of sea routes, the speed of transportation increased, but at the same time, the romance of caravan expeditions heartfelt. Gatherings around the campfire in the middle of the boundless steppe and leisurely conversations in cozy caravanserais vanished. Humanity entered a new stage of development, the era of powerful empires whose prosperity was based on maritime trade. Nevertheless, memories of the legendary route did not fade into oblivion. Even when the last trade processions left the borders of Central Asian cities, legends of the Great Silk Road continued to live in folktales and literary works, in melodic songs and among ancient ruins. The following sections of this chapter will focus on the last caravans, abandoned cities, and how the memory of the once thriving road was preserved in people's hearts, despite its actual disappearance. Imagine the faded walls of majestic Samarkand, the deserted market rows, and gusts of wind scattering dust from roads that no longer see travelers' feet. When it comes to the Great Silk Road, images of its heyday usually come to mind. The bustling markets of Samarkand, the endless caravans crossing the scorching desert, meetings of representatives of various peoples and cultures. However, like everything else in this world, this path was destined to have its sunset, which turned out to be long and filled with nostalgia. Over time, sea routes became dominant, and the main volume of trade shifted to ships sailing the oceans. However, individual caravans continued to travel along the ancient land routes, driven by personal needs, ingrained habits, or even simple human stubbornness. These last caravans, of course, no longer resembled the magnificent processions of hundreds of camels and people that once crossed continents. Now they were small groups of merchants, as if living in the past glory. They understood perfectly well that the era of prosperity of caravan routes had passed, but the road remained an integral part of their lives, their personal destiny. In the oasis cities, like monuments of a bygone era, Razrushani caravanserais still stood. Their ancient walls preserved the echo of voices spoken in dozens of different languages, the tart aroma of oriental spices, and the heat of blazing bonfires. Now, only a few travelers or nomads caught on the road at night found shelter within these walls. Dust and wind freely roamed the deserted rooms, spreading the sadness of desolation. Some cities completely disappeared from the face of the earth, erased by time and sands. Oases that had supported the life of caravans for centuries gradually dried up, turning fertile lands into lifeless deserts. In place of noisy and crowded markets, only grass and thorny bushes now grew. But the memory of the Great Road did not fade. In folk legends and tales, in the wise stories of old men, stories were carefully preserved about those distant times when the legendary Silk Road connected different worlds and cultures. These stories were passed from mouth to mouth, like a quiet whisper of a bygone era, reminding of past greatness. And sometimes, travelers, accidentally straying from the path, could stumble upon the semi-Razrushani ruins of old inns in the endless steppe. Among the debris and sand, one could find fragile shards of Chinese porcelain, rust-covered coins, and faded pieces of once bright fabric. These random, minor finds served only as faint echoes of past grandeur, reminiscent of the Silk Road's glorious era. Even in its decline, the Great Silk Road continued to influence people's lives. From the 15th to the 17th centuries, certain sections served as local trade arteries. Local merchants engaged in livestock trading, selling textiles, spices, and handicrafts, making it an integral part of the regional way of life. During that time, some Central Asian rulers attempted to restore the path to its former glory. They built fortresses, restored markets, and attracted merchants. However, the world underwent dramatic changes, marked by the rise of great empires, the era of factory production and colonization, as well as the advent of steamships and railways. Caravan trade lost its economic significance, but gained a new dimension, cultural and symbolic. In the 19th century, European researchers, archaeologists, and travelers rushed to search for lost cities along the Silk Road. They conducted excavations, striving to discover traces of an ancient civilization in the sands that had connected different worlds for centuries. Some of them, like pilgrims, followed in the footsteps of caravans, not for commercial gain, but in search of knowledge. Their travel notes and maps revived interest in the Great Silk Road, reminding humanity of the existence of a road that once changed the course of history. Even in the harsh mountain passes of the Pamirs, or in the labyrinths of dusty streets of ancient cities, one can still discern the imprints of past eras. In majestic Samarkand and sacred Bukhara, melodies still ring out, celebrating merchants and endless caravans. In Kashgar, like guardians of time, stand ancient caravanserais, whose walls hold the echo of voices of travelers from all corners of the earth. In the vast sands of the Taklamakan Desert, archaeologists continue to find ancient scrolls and artifacts buried under the weight of centuries. The Great Silk Road, once a thriving trade artery, has passed into history but left an indelible mark on human memory, turning into a legend. It has become the embodiment of people's ability to overcome borders, build bridges between cultures, and find common ground despite differences. Today, travelers, archaeologists, and tourists once again rush along the ancient routes, but they are drawn not by a thirst for profit, but by a desire to find echoes of bygone times, to touch the history of an era when people went to meet each other through endless deserts, inaccessible mountains, and the passage of time. In the next chapter, we will delve into the influence of the Silk Road on culture, architecture, mythology, and our dreams of distant wanderings. Let us imagine the last caravan slowly disappearing over the horizon, clouds of dust rising into the air, the quiet rustle of steps, and the last glimmers of a bygone era. The Great Road has come to an end, but its history continues to live in people's hearts. The legendary Great Silk Road, once connecting east and west, is now erased from geographical maps. You will no longer see endless caravans of camels wandering through endless deserts and steppes. Majestic city walls have turned to dust, and once bustling caravanserais have become silent ruins. However, the history of this great trade route has not sunk into oblivion. It lives in the memory of mankind, permeating culture, language, architecture, songs, and legends. Each stone, each path that caravans walked has become an integral part of a vast, invisible map imprinted in the sun. Minds of the peoples of Eurasia. The Silk Road left an indelible mark, primarily in cities. Many modern metropolises of Central Asia, China, and the Middle East owe their birth and prosperity to this historical path. Cities such as Samarkand, Bukhara, Kashgar, Khotan, Merv, Nishapur, Tbilisi, and Trabzon achieved their greatness and cultural flourishing thanks to the lively trade and exchange of ideas that flourished during the Silk Road era. These cities became true crossroads of civilizations, where East met West, North met South. Unique architectural styles were born here, incorporating elements of various cultures. Majestic minarets and elegant pagodas, monumental domes and exquisite arches, ornate mosaics and carved portals. All this is a priceless legacy of the Silk Road, captured in stone, testifying to the past grandeur and cultural exchange between peoples. The echo of the ancient Silk Road resounds not only in the stones of ancient fortresses, but also in the language itself, in the way of life of peoples. An infinite number of words, whether of Turkic, Persian, Chinese, or European origin, are rooted in the era of the flourishing of this trade route. The names of goods, The names of cities, units of measurement of weight and monetary signs, culinary masterpieces and advanced technologies, all these are silent witnesses of bygone days, reminiscent of the past greatness of ancient roads. In the melodic songs and enchanting tales born from the heart of Central Asia, brave merchants, tireless travelers, daring bandits, and the Great Silk Road itself, stretching across boundless expanses, are still celebrated. These stories, without a known author, were passed down orally, told around crackling fires, passed from father to son, and whispered by weary travelers in the shade of caravanserais. Many legends and myths carefully preserve echoes of those distant times. In China, legends were woven about mysterious Western lands inhabited by wondrous peoples. In Europe, rumors circulated about the mighty Great Khan, ruler of the East, whose treasuries were full of untold riches. These legends, like sparks, ignited a flame of curiosity and became one of the main stimuli for the age of great geographical discoveries. The Silk Road left an indelible mark on the culinary traditions of various peoples. Along with the moving caravans, spices, grains, unique recipes, and even methods of food preparation migrated from one culture to another, enriching and transforming it. Rice and noodles, fragrant spices and invigorating tea, juicy grapes and nutritious walnuts. Many products and dishes became an integral part of the national cuisine of peoples, precisely because of these lively roads that linked East and West. The echo of the ancient route is reflected in the world of art. Samarkand masters of ceramics, like alchemists, melted into their products techniques borrowed from distant China. In Byzantine mosaics, shimmering in the light of candles, motifs of Persian ornaments appear, like secret messages from the past. In luxurious fabrics woven in Bukhara, elegant Chinese patterns are reflected as in a mirror, and in Persian miniatures full of color and life, the influence of Buddhist and Indian iconography is guessed, like a whisper of spiritual traditions. The Great Silk Road, this ancient trade route, has become a thread of Ariadne, linking various civilizations and creating a unique cultural fabric, unparalleled in human history. But perhaps the most profound influence of the Silk Road was on the world of ideas. It gave rise to the idea that the world can be connected, that beyond the horizon live people with whom you can have a dialogue, trade, argue, and even love. In a world full of borders and conflicts, the Silk Road served as a reminder of the possibility of mutual understanding and exchange, like a beacon of hope in a raging sea. Today, when camel caravans have long become a legend, the idea of the Silk Road continues to live in people's hearts. Governments of various countries have again turned to this concept, talking about creating a new Silk Road, a network of transport corridors that should connect China, Central Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, as if restoring the broken threads of history. Projects of railways, modern highways, and powerful pipelines bear the proud name Silk Road, reminding us that in the past there was already a period when the world was connected by a network of roads, like a web woven from human efforts. But, as in ancient times, the most important thing on these roads is not goods, but people, their stories, culture, hopes, and dreams, like precious stones that they carry with them. In the following part of this chapter, we will turn our gaze to how archaeologists, writers, and artists made a kind of rediscovery of the Great Silk Road for the modern world. Its image, shrouded in mysteries and adventures, triumphantly entered the treasury of world culture, penetrating even into the dreams of those who have never set foot on the shifting sands of the deserts, but feel in the depths of their souls an irresistible attraction to distant wanderings. Imagine how the wind wanders through the boundless steppes, carrying scraps of forgotten speeches of ancient merchants. How in melodic songs and enchanting fairy tales, the muffled rustle of a huge caravan is clearly heard, slowly disappearing beyond the horizon. This ancient path still resonates in our hearts. Centuries have passed since the last majestic caravan dissolved into the distance. Ruthless time and all-consuming sand erased caravan paths from the face of the earth, turned once prosperous caravanserais into silent ruins, and oasis cities changed their owners or disappeared altogether. Nevertheless, the memory of the legendary Silk Road continues to live in the human imagination, like the shimmering light of a distant star, whose ray reaches us through the immeasurable thickness of time. In the 19th century, when powerful European powers launched active exploration of the mysterious East, interest in this ancient route flared up with renewed vigor. Brave travelers, inquisitive archaeologists, and insightful diplomats set out again. But this time, their goal was not precious silk and exotic spices, but priceless knowledge, sensational discoveries, and the restoration of lost pages of history. The names of Sven Hedin, Aurel Stein, Paul Pelliot, and Albert von Lecoq are forever etched in history, thanks to their daring and fruitful expeditions into the heart of Central Asia. In the sands of the vast Taklamakan Desert, traces of once thriving Buddhist monasteries, bustling caravanserais, and lively trading posts were discovered. Archaeologists unearthed ancient manuscripts, Buddha statues, and scrolls written in Sogdian and Chinese. These sensational discoveries revealed forgotten civilizations to the world and reminded us of the existence of an ancient artery connecting East and West. However, it wasn't just researchers who paved the way for understanding the significance of this historical phenomenon. Writers, poets, artists, and musicians saw in the image of the Silk Road a symbol of humanity's unquenchable thirst for knowledge and cooperation. In 20th century literary works, this road transformed into a metaphor for spiritual quests and journeys. In poetic lines and on the pages of novels, it embodied the road of life, the path to self-discovery and the comprehension of truth. In cinema and musical compositions, the image of the Silk Road emerged as an echo of an era when people, casting aside fear and doubt, moved towards one another. In the 20th century, interest in the Silk Road flared up with renewed vigor. Archaeological expeditions continue to bring amazing finds, and thousands of travelers annually follow in the footsteps of ancient caravans to see Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar with their own eyes. For many, this becomes not just a geographical journey, but a profound inner one. In our time, the concept of the Silk Road is no longer associated with a specific road, but rather is a symbol of memories and dreams. It is an echo of a bygone era, when humanity was able to unite different corners of the world, and at the same time, it is a hope that even in the modern world, despite conflicts and borders, people are capable of finding common ground and striving for mutual understanding. In recent decades, the global community has been actively working to revive this idea, creating economic corridors, developing transport routes, and supporting cultural initiatives united under the name New Silk Road. And although modern roads are paved with asphalt, and instead of caravans, goods are transported by trains and trucks A deeper aspiration is visible behind this economic project: to restore the lost connection between people, to recreate that ancient network where cities and peoples were parts of a single whole. However, it is important to remember that the Great Silk Road was never just a trade artery. It was a path along which ideas, beliefs, music, culinary traditions, and hope spread. It taught people to listen and observe, to accept the new without losing their own identity. It was a path permeated with a spirit of tolerance and curiosity, risks and discoveries. In our time, when borders are once again becoming barriers and the world seems fragmented, the memory of the Great Silk Road sounds especially relevant. It reminds us that the history of humanity is a continuous process of movement, exchange, and encounters. In each of us lives a part of this great path, manifested in our languages and traditions, in our cuisine and music, in the books and stories that we pass on to future generations, in our desire to understand and learn about other cultures. This path has left an indelible mark on humanity itself, and this mark will live forever. In conclusion, it is worth emphasizing that the Great Silk Road is not just a page in history. It is a story that continues to develop within each of us, reminding us of the importance of cultural exchange and mutual understanding between peoples. As our journey comes to a logical conclusion, when the narrative gradually subsides, like the chime of caravan bells caught by a gust of wind, the author invites the reader to take one last look at the path traveled and indulge in memories. Together, we have made a long journey, stretching from the bustling trading squares of ancient Chang'an to the semi-ruined walls of Merv, from the star-studded skies of the Pamirs to the endless sands of the Taklamakan Desert. We walked side by side with merchants and pilgrims, sages and caravan guards, listening to the rustle of silk fabrics, feeling the fragrance of spices, inhaling the dust of roads, and listening to conversations in dozens of different languages. Before our eyes, the Great Silk Road was born, gained strength, underwent changes, experienced periods of war and peace, ups and downs. We watched it transform from an ordinary trade artery into a path along which ideas, cultures, and meanings spread. Initially, it was a thin thread laid by people seeking to exchange surpluses for necessary goods. However, with each year, with each kilometer traveled, its significance increased, turning into a pulsating artery of civilization. And yet, like everything in this world, the Silk Road was allotted a certain time. Empires that once ruled it have faded into oblivion. Caravans have ceased their wanderings, city walls have turned to ruins, and roads have become overgrown. But the memory of the Silk Road has not disappeared without a trace. It continues to live on in the modern world, reflected in the names of cities, folk legends, the aromas of spices, the melodies of songs, the patterns of carpets, culinary recipes, fairy tales, and, of course, in our imagination. The road has become intertwined with the very fabric of human existence, teaching a valuable lesson. True treasure lies not in material wealth, but in the priceless opportunity to establish connections, exchange ideas, and listen to one another. It is the road that gives us the awareness that beyond our familiar world, there is another person, perhaps speaking a different language and professing a different faith, but possessing the same responsive heart. In today's world, where speed has become the defining characteristic, borders seem more rigid, and means of communication allow us to instantly exchange information. We sometimes feel a particularly acute nostalgia for those times when travel was long and unhurried. Meeting a stranger was an event full of anticipation, and every story told was a true treasure. The Great Silk Road serves as a reminder that we are all part of a single world, that each person's life is a unique journey, a road strewn with meetings and partings, dangers and discoveries, joys and losses. And perhaps, when our gaze sweeps across the map of the world, we involuntarily remember that behind every city, every road, every name lies a story that began many centuries ago, when the first merchants, driven by greed and curiosity, dared to venture into the unknown. Perhaps, through the noise and bustle of modern life, we can catch the quiet, barely audible rustle of a caravan, tirelessly wandering through the ages, like a ghost of past grandeur. We should not think that the path traveled has disappeared without a trace. No, it has simply become elusive, like echoes of bygone eras, forever imprinted in the depths of our consciousness. And now, as the narrative comes to an end, eyelids grow heavy and thoughts become smooth, the author invites the reader to plunge into the world of dreams. Let everyone close their eyes and imagine an endless night stretching over the shifting sands of the desert, and above their heads, a celestial vault studded with myriads of twinkling stars. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of a caravan can be seen, like fireflies, making their way through the dense darkness. Someone's voice quietly and lingeringly sings an old melody. Camels, slowly stepping, leave their tracks on the sandy surface. Ahead lies a long and unhurried path, full of mysteries and unexpected encounters. This journey will never end, and as sleep closes our eyelids, perhaps it is now that the reader will become part of this majestic caravan, tirelessly continuing its journey through time and space.